welcome back for the third episode of our Women Crush Wednesday interview series. I'm Mansi, one of the MedSoc women's officers, and our very special guest today is Dr. Payal Mukherjee, who is an ENT surgeon, an associate professor, and an advocate for gender equity. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Our first question for you today is, what inspired you to become a surgeon?
Being a UNSW med student myself, my first interest in surgery was Dr. Pandey in anatomy and Dr. Vu. So I was a big anatomy fanatic. And as I started doing my clinical years as a medical student, I was introduced to some surgeons who really were anatomy fanatics as well. And so that was my introduction to surgery, and the more I applied the anatomy, the more I understood. And then, of course, head and neck anatomy I found quite challenging and therefore exciting. And I actually taught it as a medical student at UNSW in my senior years. Then my career sort of migrated towards ENT or specialties related to the head and neck.
Our second question is, who are your role models and why do you look up to them?
Well, I suppose I have life role models, but also career role models. My grandmother has been a very strong role model for me, mainly in inciting for me a hunger for knowledge. When my grandmother was going through high school, she lived in the time of when India was going through partition. Educational opportunities that we take for granted were not available to a whole generation of young men and women of that time, and especially for women, I suppose, with the cultural barriers as well. And she really wanted to be a doctor, and she didn't have those opportunities. So that sort of really instilled in me not to take opportunities for granted, particularly when it came to education. And then that's sort of driven me to be a perpetual student in terms of going, and always being inquisitive and being hungry for knowledge. That's obviously filtered through my parents, who've they're first generation migrants, and they've also during their schooling years had political upheaval that affected their education. As far as career role models of mentors along the way that have then nurtured my curiosity and hunger and guided me, and then those mentors have changed in different periods of my career. But there you have clinical mentors, research mentors, and you've sort of got a go-to person for everything now.
What are some challenges that you've encountered as a woman in your field, and how did you overcome them?
There have been many challenges, and I don't think I'm unusual as a woman in my field to have experienced them. Career progression has always been about dodging barriers or overcoming them. I have a colleague who describes it as a snakes and ladders game. A higher proportion of women have more snakes in their career paths than ladders. And it just means that it takes you longer to get anywhere, and then sometimes you give up along the way. Some of the barriers you expect are in the assumptions that people make about you as a woman, particularly as a female who's a surgeon but also an academic, and then a single parent. So they sort of assume that you don't have an ambition to be competitive. I don't know why. And that then leads to conscious and subconscious bias. And it's being able to address those. It's about being present but not conflicting. Because you want to be known for your positivity, and it can easily be turned into negativity, and that doesn't usually help any situation. In surgery, we have a 50% gender pay gap, and then that is also a barrier when you're trying to address your juniors say to you about being visible, particularly in an academic and a university sense, when a lot of the work that we do as clinical affiliates is they're unpaid. Having the funding support that I think, again, there's a gender disparity in that as well, in this funding support they get, and then ability to, in an academic sense, progress onto academic pathways, titles from senior lecturer to professor pathways. There's a lot of barriers in that, and that then prevents visibility for the younger generation, so you can be a visible mentor for them. There's always the aspect of bullying, both in clinical and non-clinical sense, and being able to overcome that. And I think for me particularly, what I've found a barrier is sometimes females don't help females, which is a shame, but that is also changing, which is really positive. So the more females you have come through, the more you have support. In fact, I've literally just hopped off a Zoom meeting with a colleague in Perth, Fiona Wood, who's this brilliant plastic surgeon, and just was an Australian of the Year as well, and to be able to network and to work with people and participate in research with colleagues like that, I must say it's fantastic. And the more you look around, the more you start to see fantastic female role models arise as well, which really sort of then changes the balance and your perspective of that. So there are challenges, but there are also solutions.
Our next question is about work-life balance. How do you maintain one in a field that's notorious for being so challenging in that way?
2020 has been not a good year for work-life balance. I submitted my PhD in June, and then, coming in as the state chair of the college in the middle of a pandemic. However, being a parent really grounds you. You are forced to take time and committed to life, because it's not just about your parental responsibilities, but it's your time that you have to commit to life that really does ground you in terms of what is important, and to have hobbies outside. But it is challenging. I think, at least looking at 2020, I can't say that I've done the most justice to having a balance. Having said that, also that balance changes during time of crisis. For example, I can't exercise all the time, but I know that there are times that I protect for exercising, whether it's a pandemic or not. And I will choose the type of exercise that I do, depending on your time in terms of group activities versus solo activities. So I think that does change, but it is really important to have some part of you that is separate to what you do, because if you don't nourish yourself, you can't give back. And a lot of medicine is about giving.
Do you have any advice in general for female medical students?
For the females listening onto this, I'd really like to echo some advice I got yesterday from one of my mentors. And it's really true. I mean, only you are responsible for the choices you make and the journey that you set for yourself. Particularly, I think for females, it's true. If you have numerous barriers, you just said, this is too hard, I'm going to give up. But often out of those barriers, when you go through them, you end up on a different journey, a path less walked, and that may open up other opportunities that you would not have embraced or even explored, and that might turn into something quite beautiful. It's a rewarding journey, but it's not a journey that's without difficulties. But I don't think that is unique to surgery itself. I think anything that you do that is passionate and it's competitive, you're going to have barriers. To challenge those boundaries, you have to make sure that you nourish yourself with support. So finding mentors is really important. But also, when you do have a barrier, to focus on it constructively. When I was experiencing some bullying, one of my mentors, sort of said that, look, 30% of people, there'll be a proportion of people you'll never change, and there's no point for you to fight that, because it's just how it is. So focus on the 70% that, focus on the people that you can, and a proportion of that, about 30% will support you no matter what, and about 40% are the bystanders, and focus on the bystanders, because then suddenly you have support around you for your concept and your vision, so that which you can deliver, and that's how you affect change. So I think those pieces of wisdom have been really useful for me, and if I can share that with others, I'd be grateful. All of the challenges that my generation of women that I see all around me, because I'm not the only person who is an advocate in this area, and the fact that it is changing is because of a lot of hard work from a lot of women. And if there is anything that we can achieve, it's just to make sure that, your generation of surgical careers have more opportunities and have less barriers. So if any of you are not considering pursuing a career in surgery because of barriers, I'll be very upset with you.